Good morning, everybody, and greetings to all of you from the Executive Board of Humboldt-Universität. Today, the official opening conference of the cluster Matters of Activity, Image, Space, Material takes place. The cluster has deliberately scheduled its opening into the second funding year 2020 in order to be able to present initial research and not only the idea of the proposal. Due to the containment measures for the corona pandemic, the conference has been postponed from May to November 2020. However, in the cluster of excellence, Matters of Activity, researchers from more than 40 disciplines are investigating the activity of matter. The central vision is to rediscover the analog in the age of the digital within the activity of images, spaces, and materials, driven by the integrative nature of the humanities, the natural sciences, and the different design disciplines. Biology and technology, mind and material, nature and culture intertwine in a new way. In this context, the interdisciplinary research and development of sustainable practices and structures is a central concern in areas such as architecture and soft robotics, textiles, materials and digital filters, and surgical cutting techniques. So what does that mean exactly? In the future, you might see services that emerge out of bacterial activities that are closely linked to weaving processes. You might use, instead of multi-material, one-material devices that are at the same time soft and hard, flexible and stiff, or shape-changing materials adapting to certain environmental necessities. You will visit exhibitions showing active exhibits and processes. Or your surgeon will use an adaptive digital twin that helps to simulate the intrinsic activity of body tissue in order to make medical procedures even more accurate and safe in the long run. The cluster Matters of Activity will stimulate Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin as a center for outstanding interdisciplinary research between the humanities, the natural sciences, engineering, and design disciplines, taking advantage of the collaborative potential of Humboldt-Universität and the city of Berlin as a thriving and diversified center of research and design. Matters of Activity will establish an interdisciplinary approach based on a culture of trust and collaboration as equal partners between humanities scholars, natural and computer scientists, engineers, and designers at Humboldt-Universität and beyond. An interdisciplinary perspective of this kind is unprecedented within the current academic system. The integrative approach of the cluster Matters of Activity is therefore unique in its constellation of researchers from very divergent disciplines, collaboratively focusing on a highly relevant topic and sharing their ideas and methods. It is furthermore unparalleled in its efforts to create a constant dialogue between research and society. Now, concerning interdisciplinary and practice-based PhD education, independence of research, the integration of the humanities and the natural sciences, and the unity of research and teaching are the main principles on which Humboldt-Universität was founded in 1810. The Humboldtian model of higher education, which is centered on a holistic combination of research and teaching, is the archetype of the modern university aspired to and found in most parts of the world today. Due to the highly complex challenges of modern professional life, a university degree in one discipline is often not sufficient today to build a lifetime career. Besides the international master programs Open Design and Co-op Design Research, the cluster Matters of Activity aims to establish new regulations for a practice-based PhD in design and for interdisciplinary research fields at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. These Helmholtz doctorates will close the gap in the university's interdisciplinary research approaches through the promotion of early career researchers by creating a framework for a design-oriented, material and object-based PhD at our university. Given that design is institutionally excluded from basic research in the current German academic system, this would represent a strategic and innovation-promoting breakthrough. Candidates for the Helmholtz doctorates will focus on research problems relevant to society and enabling a unity of theory and practice through constant feedback between basic research and application. Following the principle of research and display, the cluster will actively involve interested members of the public in scientific debates. Numerous highly relevant facilities, primarily located in Berlin's historical and cultural nucleus, provide an ideal venue for innovative and diverse interactions between the cluster's interdisciplinary researchers' projects and the interested public. Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin's active role in the Humboldt Forum, Berlin's future Center for the Arts, Culture, Science and Learning, will create further synergies with Berlin's rich cultural scene. The Humboldt Labor in the Humboldt Forum will provide the cluster Matters of Activity with a forum for interdisciplinary research where basic and applied research processes can be presented as integral parts of our culture, and possible futures can be debated with a broad audience. Humboldt-Universität firmly supports the cluster and will ensure that the funding has a sustainable impact. It sees the project as an incredible opportunity for both our university and the city of Berlin as a center for research, knowledge, and culture. Matters of Activity will enhance our university's already outstanding position as a diverse international university covering all disciplines while strengthening its research profile by establishing Gestaltung as the basis of flexible and dynamic collaborations that moves far beyond the academic realm. I wish all of you a very productive and highly successful opening conference and many fruitful discussions in the future. Thank you very much, and with that, I hand over to the next speaker, Professor Schäffner.
Thank you, Peter Frensch, for your fantastic introduction to our structure and institutional constellation. Good morning, everybody. I also welcome you all to the first annual conference, The Analog in the Digital Age of our cluster, Matters of Activity. Also, in behalf of my colleagues and co-directors, Claudia Marais, Peter Fratzel, and Horst Bredekamp. With our disciplinary backgrounds, material sciences, design, cultural history and theory, art history, already the four of us represent the interdisciplinary structure of our cluster. Even if German Research Foundation, DFG, labeled us a humanities cluster, we ignore the classical boundaries between natural sciences, humanities, and the design disciplines. After having developed an interdisciplinary laboratory during the last years in the predecessor cluster Image, Knowledge, Gestaltung, we were again one of the lucky winners at the nationwide excellency competition. It was a great and proud moment for all of us when we finally could start Matters of Activity at the beginning of last year. Today, you can attend our opening event, our first annual cluster conference, which was cancelled in May due to the pandemic situation. In the meantime, the situation has not at all become easier, but we could adopt our modes of working. We transformed our planned physical meeting into the virtual conference, The Analog in the Digital Age. The analog of the contagious physical contact seems today in deep contrast to the purity of the virtual space. But the virtual does not appear anymore as the only desired target of our techno-society. More than ever, people feel the distance to the physical dimension of society as a strange loss. It is maybe for the first time that the difference between the real and the virtual has been experienced in such an intense way. And it seems obvious to everybody that the free virtual access to people and social networks does not replace physical contacts. This new situation and experience will surely redefine the relationship between the physical and the virtual in the future. The objective of our cluster and the topic of our conference, however, tackle this dichotomy of the material and the virtual, the analog and the digital, in a more fundamental way. Our proposal for the cluster started with the sentences, "A groundbreaking event of the 21st century is and will be the reinvention of the analog in the digital age. Its core is a new active materiality which is beginning to transform research and everyday life." The material activity we address in our cluster is not opposed to the digital. It moves beyond the digital age. Our cluster is heading towards the transdigital material revolution. We started resetting the idea of immaterial codes in activities of the digital age within matter and materials itself. Materials are no longer seen as mere passive carriers of externally implemented codes and activities. It is the case in nearly all of our artifacts and mechanical as well as digital machines. Our technological environments represent the profound dichotomy of mind and matter, where this designing human mind has implemented its preconceived ideas everywhere. In a historical perspective, this is a process that was developed primarily since industrialization and was turned into its most radical form in the digital age. The material basis, as well as nature as a whole, obtained the role of passive resources that can be controlled, dominated, and exploited. The proper activity of materials was considered as a failure or defect and thus suppressed and silenced. It was the strategy to generate a reliable and passive basis for the undisturbed and uncontrolled operation of our technological world. The move from mechanization takes command, according to Siegfried Gideon, to Alan Turing's version of digitized machines taking command in an even more radical way, is now arriving at the level of matter itself. Today, matter is envisioned as malleable as pixels on the screen. But this seeming immaterialization of our virtual world is only one effect of our digital age. Digital technology makes this at the same time a new kind of encounter with the material world possible. Material sciences fundamentally rely on the analysis possible by digital instruments such as scanning electron microscopes that make the inner structures and architectures of materials visible. Above all, organic matter reveals surprisingly dynamic and active structures that can be regarded as machines completely different from our technology. This perspective inverts the basic assumption of our technology that materials have to fulfill the obedient role of passive carriers of mechanical or digital activity. A fundamental separation of activity, symbolic operations and codes from the passive material basis does not exist in biological materials. Here, all these elements are integrated in one and the same structure. Material thus is fundamentally changed. It is active, responsive, adaptive, soft, smart, and contains in its inner structure material code. And at the same time, this new materialism is an important feature in the humanities, in design and engineering. Titles such as vibrant matter, materials as machines, active matter, soft robotics show an overarching issue of material activity. Such a transdigital material is the starting point for a material revolution that will overcome the dichotomy between the digital and material, and thus the old and destructive dichotomy between technology and nature we suffer in terms of the Anthropocene crisis. Addressing the material activity as the analog is therefore not a strategy to go back to a pre-digital analog, but to reset symbolic operations within the material itself, according to the material's inner activity, without silencing all its own capacities. Our research structure responds to this challenge by focusing on material activity in 3 research units: practices, structures, codes. Thus, we combine cultural and natural practices with the material's inherent active structures and a novel, challenging idea of a material code. All our 6 corresponding projects are part of a convergent research process. The 3 exemplary practices of weaving, filtering, and cutting represent theoretical and practical operations of Gestaltung, fundamental for active images, active spaces, and materials as different modes of symbolic material operations. In a parallel way, we analyze weaving, filtering, and cutting in the research unit of structures as a structure-building activity, focusing on the functional and agential character. In material form function, we analyze the relationship of form and function not as externally added elements of material, but as intrinsic dimension, thus overcoming the classical hylomorphic scheme. In object space agency, we analyze on the level of objects, persons, and architectural spaces the consequences of material activity. When these material agents and actors become essential within distributed agencies, objects are no longer defined by their passive obedience to human-controlled procedures. And as a third a layer of our entangled research structure, practice and structures are related to the research unit codes. Here, our focus is on the fundamental unity of symbolic material as an original difference. This is our main theoretical as well as practical and design challenge. It is at the core of the new analog, which points beyond the digital age. A fundamental precondition for achieving this objective is our interdisciplinary approach, where we elaborate an integrative procedure for combining history, epistemology, with experimental theory and practice and design practices. This interaction deeply transforms classical approaches of the humanities, natural sciences, and design. This integrative approach you have to keep in mind during all our presentations. It changes our modes of reasoning, our modes of experimenting, and our modes of designing. By generating a strong unity of theory and practice, we bring history into the lab, we transform design into experimental practice that also integrates theoretical dimensions. All these structures and practices we put together on a Bauhaus-like theater stage. Here we can start to deal the still unthinkable with our minds, hands, objects, materials, geometric structures of bones, biofilms, woven tissues, felt or wax, that all have a long history in different cultures, but an even more important future to come. You can imagine the importance of practical collaboration for us. To provide you today some insight into the new architecture of knowledge production of our cluster, we tried to change the classical setting of a conference, where in front of the audience, a researcher talks about his or her most important aspects, mostly accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation. This is why today we want to take you with us into a working, thinking, and makerspace, all fundamental for our research. We extend, so to say, our res cogitans into a visible res extensa. For achieving this, we developed a real virtual architecture as a space and time frame for encounter and exchange. So you can discover today a multitude of surprisingly designed and individually accessible virtual knowledge rooms in a 360 degrees environment. The timeline of our program is virtual and real at the same time, as a series of real events. The following presentation offers you a sort of guided tour through our research activities, bringing you into contact with spaces, materials, images, practices, and structures that are protagonists on our operation table, or let's better say, theoretical stage. The presentations will be supplemented by virtual meeting opportunities as live discussion rounds and wrap-ups. You can move all the day, step by step with us through these architectures and attend presentations of all our cluster members. After my introduction, we will move to the greenhouse of the Berlin Botanical Garden, where Claudia Mares will start soon her talk on truth to materials. Claudia is designer and cultural theorist, and she is looking back to the 19th century world exhibitions as platforms where it becomes evident to what extent the new order of industrialization changed the whole realm of machines, artifacts, and materials. With this idea in mind, we shift to material sciences. You can see what different kind of modes of dealing with materials become possible when materials obtain a new active role. At the Max Planck Institute for Colloids and Interfaces at Golm, you will meet Peter Fratzel, a material scientist. He will talk about natural active materials by taking biological materials as adaptive structures that show, compared to our existing machines, a completely different design of active materials and material activity. Moving from Golm, crossing Berlin to Adlershof, you will meet Jürgen Rabe, a physicist at IRIS, the Integrated Research Institute of the Sciences.
Hi Wolfgang, see you later.
Hi Jürgen, we will be back soon. Jürgen will talk about matters of free energy and the tesseract. His research is focused on material interfaces where water interacts with the material surfaces in highly energetic processes. You will understand why water is such an essential agent in biological materials. This state of the art in the research of material structures makes the fundamental change obvious we face today in terms of activity of materials. Zooming out of this future-oriented research into history helps us to realize the extent of the change from passive to active matter. We will therefore move with Nina Samuel to the Berlin Museum of Medical History at Charité. Nina, she is art historian, will talk about passive matter as a fundamental strategy for the conservation of museum artifacts in the 19th century. The history of materials such as wax is a crucial element of our research, since they show that our predominating culture of passive materials has in fact a rather short history. Focusing on the very materials in their characteristics is also a decisive challenge for the humanities, the Geisteswissenschaften. With Horst Bredekamp, we move to Feld. As image theorist, Horst will talk on the history of Feld material iconology, dealing with this biomaterial that shows a long history of fundamental fusing symbolic and material agency. The new status of materials and its active character no longer seems to serve the purpose of realizing and materializing preconceived ideas, as it was the classical design and engineering procedure. It is also highly challenging for design to change from passive, rigid, dry, and thus obedient materials to soft, elastic, wet, and active materials. This is why weaving and textiles as a field with a very large history becomes so prominent for us. The architect Ivar Riseta and the designer Bastian Bayer will take us to the realm of design in their presentation on soft fibrous structures. Biofilms or skins are biological tissues that comprise complex structures, hyperbolic geometries, and thus require the joint efforts of biology, mathematics, and beyond. With my Fenvi Evans, she's mathematician, and Regine Henge, she's biologist, you can enter marvelous spaces of buckling, wrinkling, and folding, emphasizing the role of geometry in the dynamic growing processes of materials. And as a last presentation, you will be able to meet me again at the design workshop of our cluster, where I will try to pick up some threads of the other presentations, moving towards an analog code, which is a central focus of my research. This sequence of questions, approaches, practices, and objects we all put together at our operating table, which is a workbench, a drawing space, a lab space, and a space of reasoning at the same time. This Bauhaus-like table or stage goes far beyond the historical model then placed in Dessau, disconnected from humanities and science research. In this sense, we are some sort of completely new Bauhaus, including disciplinary and cultural variety into our approach. Recently, in her State of the Union address at the European Parliament plenary session on September 16, President von der Leyen asked for a new European Bauhaus for building the world we want to live in. I guess we in fact can answer, we already are a new and different Bauhaus, incorporating not only design disciplines, but the whole range of knowledge production. And as such, we are not at all limited to a separate European version, but essentially collaborating with people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Our program of basic research points at the core of the Anthropocene crisis and is a response to that urgency, which makes a really big deal necessary, a new culture of the material. Now you should go back to the anchor room and look there for the entrance for the talk of Claudia Marais. I hope you will find it and won't get lost somewhere in our fantastic architecture. Enjoy the whole day, and I see you soon in the afternoon. Thank you very much.